So, a few weeks ago, I asked you all on Mastodon to send me all the questions you had for Proton, because I have interviewed the CEO of Proton for ProtonMail, ProtonVPN, Proton Pass, and he has answered a lot of your questions. There were a ton of those, more than 150, so obviously in an hour and a half we could not answer all of them, but I think we gave a very wide coverage of everything. Now, small disclaimer, this video is not sponsored by Proton. They are a regular sponsor of the channel, but not of this video, and this interview was conducted asking all your questions and mine as well. So now we're gonna jump right in and you can have all the answers that you never knew you wanted or that you actually wanted. So, hi Andy, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for agreeing to talk with me. So you're the CEO of Proton, and you agreed to answer a bunch of questions for my community, which is really cool. So we're not going to waste any time, and we're going to jump right in. So there's a mix of my own questions to introduce Proton, and questions that all of you, the audience, asked previously. So we're going to go right in. The first question I have is, how did Proton start? How did the company get its debut?
Well, actually, it started a bit on accident. And I think this is maybe a common thing with a lot of companies. But the way that it began at the very start was, I was working at CERN as a physicist back in those days. And that was around the time when, kind of the Snowden leaks had come out, right? And a lot of the physicists at CERN were thinking, well, wow, Snowden just revealed a massive government surveillance. But actually, the surveillance of big tech companies is much more massive, and this is a much bigger problem that no one is talking about. So the idea was, can we build a solution that can address that, starting with email? Because email is really online identity, right? It's the core of your online existence. And it was an open source project built at CERN. The early testers and users were actually other CERN scientists and physicists like ourselves. And then we said, okay, let's launch it and see what happens. And the very interesting thing was, within the first couple of days of putting it out on the market as a service, we had received maybe 10,000 people signing up per day. So it was really big shock, because it made it very clear that actually, the kind of crazy idea that we had, there was really a demand for this. But of course, I think, having a demand isn't something that leads to a business or a product or service that can be sustainable. And so often what you find in open source space is, there's very cool projects, but they don't actually get the full potential because it's very hard to keep growing them. And what Proton did, I think, differently and quite uniquely was, soon after we put out the service to the public domain, we launched a community crowdfunding. So it's very much a community-focused product, in that 10,000 people donated around 500,000 euros, and that was really how the journey got started. So it was something that was really born and endorsed out of the community, and still to this day exists to serve that same community.
Okay, well, that's really, really cool. But the other question I had was, why did you start specifically with email? Like, when we talk about privacy and generally like big tech being pretty invasive in terms of what data they collect, why start with email instead of, I don't know, a web browser or something like that?
Yeah, actually, it seems like the least obvious place to start, right? Because people say, oh, email, no one even uses email anymore to communicate, right? And that's something that we heard actually even back in 2014. And it's because the approach is different. The idea is, how do you best undermine Google's massive market power that allows them to dominate entire ecosystems and essentially the internet as a result? And if you look at Google, after they made the search product, the next product they built was actually the email. And no one really asked the question of, what is the value of Gmail to Google? And some people say it's just a loss leader, right? It's something that they have because to attract users. But actually, I think in many ways, Gmail is actually the cornerstone or the keystone of Google's entire ecosystem, because the way that Google business operates is they need to connect all the data they have on you, and they're able to do that very easily because you're logged into Gmail. And by being logged into Gmail, the cookies from all the websites that you visit, and all the websites that run Google AdWords or even Google Analytics, which is actually 80% of the internet, all that information can be associated to your logged in account. And that logged in account is also your real life identity. It is the essence of who you are. They know who you are as a person, so they can link your profile. And that allows them to monetize you as a person, right? So if you were to use ProtonMail instead of Gmail, actually, what you're actually doing is not just using different communication tool. What you're really doing is you're removing your identity, your profile, you as an individual, off of Google's platform, and cutting off their ability to basically link your entire activity to you as a person.
Yeah, it's one of the major links that lets them build the profile itself. Like they have plenty of small tidbits of data from other services, but they don't have like this big piece where you're absolutely going to log in there once every day.
Yes. And I think that's a power, right? Because if you use ProtonMail, you don't exist anymore to Google. You are invisible to them because you're no longer in their system. It's the most effective and fastest way to opt out of Google, and it's something as boring as email in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with that, what exactly is the business model for Proton? Because obviously you sell subscriptions to have more storage space, more advanced features in terms of privacy and security. Is that all there is? Is it just monetizing through added services and bigger tiers, or is there anything else?
Yeah. Well, in economic theory, there's a saying, which is, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? And when it comes to big tech services, that is definitely true. Gmail isn't free, Google isn't free, Facebook isn't free. You're paying with your most internet sensitive and private information, right? Now, that doesn't mean the alternative has to always be paid. And I think Proton, through our freemium business model, strikes that balance. Because actually today, the vast majority of people on Proton don't pay us. They use services for free and does everything that they need. But if you want more advanced functionality, if you want more features, more storage, or if you just want to support the project, actually you can upgrade to a paid model. And from a business perspective, people will say, well, is that sustainable? And it is, because Proton has gotten to where we are today. Actually, we don't have any VC investors. So it's maybe even more scalable and sustainable than the Silicon Valley model that depends a lot on venture capital financing.
Yeah, and you don't have to reach certain growth levels to get the next round of funding. And you can't run out of runway because, well, you're self-sufficient right now. So if you don't grow, you don't grow, but you're still operating a sustainable business.
Yes, and I think that's much more honest, right? Because it's users who directly pay us for our services, and as a result, our incentives are fully aligned, with the users. And this is much different from Google's business model, which, if you break it down, is actually a business model of deception. What Google's business is essentially doing is, I hope you don't read my privacy policy and see all the horrible things I'm doing and allow me to keep exploiting your data, right? Whereas for us, our customers are paying us to protect their privacy, and that is the thing that we're financially incentivized to do. And I think that direct relationship is really healthier for the internet. It will not be more profitable than ads. Ads will always be more profitable. But I do think long-term is more sustainable because it helps us build a society and an internet ecosystem that is simply healthier.
Since we're talking about privacy, you're in your marketing and on your website, you're talking about the fact that you're based in Switzerland. Why is it important specifically to be in Switzerland when we're talking about privacy?
Yeah, well, privacy fundamentally comes from encryption. And encryption is something that's based off of laws of mathematics, right? So theoretically, it doesn't matter where we put the company. We could be sitting in Russia, for example, and the laws of mathematics would be the same, right? Now, of course, if you go back from the hypothetical world into the real world, well, there needs to be people to operate these services. So my encryption may be perfectly, sound, in Russia, but I may have someone beating me over the head, with a stick to do something bad, right? So I think from that perspective, you need to be based in a country where there's a legal system and strong regulations that are protective of what you're trying to do. And Switzerland, of course, there's no a jurisdiction that's perfect, right? But I do think Switzerland is a country where there is a strong tradition of privacy and security. It is deeply ingrained in the culture. And the rules and regulations that are in place today do allow you to do many things that in other countries would be very difficult to do. To give you the recent example, we see now both in the UK, in the European Union, and also in the US, proposals to potentially ban end-to-end encryption.
Yeah.
And this is something that in Switzerland doesn't even get proposed because of the culture. So this is why I do think it is important. But fundamentally, the best protection needs to be from encryption and mathematics.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because in the EU, for a few years, we had this sort of hope. Well, I live in France, so I'm directly concerned with this. But we had these hopes with the GDPR and just various laws that aim at not especially breaking up big tech companies, but at least restraining the amount of power and monopoly abuse that they can do. And we had hopes that this was the right place for all of this. But while they do seem to really want to, let's say, harm the data collection business model of various companies, they don't really have that same approach to how governments approach the same kind of data. So they don't want foreign companies collecting the data, but when it's them collecting the data and monitoring what citizens do, they don't have the same care and protection system, which is, I think, why Switzerland, which is not part of the EU, it's in Europe, the continent, but not part of the EU for people who don't really situate it on a map. And I think that might be important. And since we're talking about like governments and data collection, and this leads to law enforcement, we often read that no matter how much data you have or how little data you have, if the law asks you to give it, if a country says, hand it over, we need to know what this person does, you have to comply. So obviously you do have to comply with Swiss law. And what kind of data do you have, and what can you actually give them if they're asking for it?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Unless your business is based on, a boat 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers offshore, you're subject to the regulations and laws of some country. And I think in this regard, the choice of Switzerland is also quite important, because it is a particular country that, has very good regulations of what you can and cannot request. And there's a very strong legal safeguards to prevent authorities from getting access to data, that they shouldn't have access to. But of course, there are regulations. And what I find interesting about Switzerland also is, if you look at Proton overall, the regulations that apply to our products is also very different. To give you an example, email. Email is not a new technology. It's been around for a long time. It's something regulators are very much aware of. So in the email space, there's virtually no country in the world where email doesn't fall under some sort of telecommunications regulation, right? But something newer like our VPN service or our encrypted file storage service, those are largely unregulated because regulators haven't caught up yet or don't understand those services yet. So it's interesting. So if you look at ProtonVPN, for example, there is no obligation whatsoever to collect any data or log any data. And it's actually a uniquely strong benefit in Switzerland that ProtonVPN also cannot be compelled to log any data, not at all. But email, being a communication service that's regulated under certain types of telecommunication laws, actually, you are required, in fact, to, be able to collect some information if there is a court order that is, approved by a judge. And I think, in the end of the day, that is not maybe some people say, oh, that's not good for privacy, but actually, I think there has to be balance, right? Privacy doesn't mean that you have immunity from all law enforcement and you can commit any crime that you want. And even as a provider, we also don't want our services to be used for less than legal purposes, because this actually harms the service, and it actually also creates problems for legitimate uses of our services as well.
You don't want to be known as the company that, hey, they can do whatever they want, and we know that it's being used for certain illegal purposes. You don't want to have that reputation attached to your company, because that's when governments start looking into what you're doing and try to compel you to give them a bit of data.
Yeah, so that balance is extremely important. And so the right balance then is a question of what country you're based in. And I think Switzerland, nobody's perfect, but here in Switzerland, we do strike a balance that I think is much better than most countries in the world.
Okay, well, that's interesting. And so if we couple that with encryption, because as you said, like privacy comes from encryption, how is encryption helping? How would you describe it to someone that doesn't really understand how technology works, how a computer works, or doesn't have the mathematical background to see what this is?
Yeah, well, I put it in the context of your last question. the purpose of encryption and what we use is end-to-end encryption is to really minimize the data that we have, right? If I cannot decrypt the data of the emails that people store on ProtonMail, actually, when the authorities come knocking, in fact, I can't even share that information. So the fact that we have encryption, end-to-end encryption and zero access encryption in Proton, and ProtonMail in particular, that's actually a very strong asset because yes, the law can compel me to hand over certain data, but if everything I have is already encrypted in a way that I cannot decrypt, then actually there's no law enforcement agency that can get access to the actual data itself because I myself don't have it. But it goes beyond actually just a question of law enforcement and government requests, right? Let's take a hacking, for example. Every service is going to get breached eventually. Yeah. Someday Proton will get breached as well, right? It's not a matter of if, it's a really matter of when. And if you are able to use strong encryption, like we do on our services, actually you minimize the damage from such a breach because the data that hacker can steal, well, quite frankly, they can't steal from us something that we ourselves do not possess. Yeah. And this is the value of encryption, and this is why we're very rigorous on enforcing encryption in all of our products.
Yeah, they could theoretically steal, or a government could request the data, and if everything you could hand over or that could get stolen would be unusable without the decryption keys. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's I think that answers the next question I had, which was why would someone use an encrypted email service? I guess that's just to prevent like this data from being legible by anybody who might want to access it, whether it's a government, a law enforcement agency, or a hacker.
Yeah, but I think beyond that, you would use it because you don't want Google abusing your data, and you want to free yourself from Google's ecosystem. So, if you switch your Gmail with the ProtonMail, you don't exist anymore to Google. You are free from their ecosystem. And I think that's something that is extremely powerful because that freedom means a lot, right? That freedom means that you are now, for the first time, maybe ever, actually in control of your data and your identity online.
Yeah, you might still be using other services from Google. Obviously, if you move from Gmail to ProtonMail, but you still have a Google account to watch YouTube videos, you're still contributing data to Google. But if your only entry point was Gmail, I guess, just switching to something that is encrypted means that you have separated that from what is collected about you.
But I say more than that as well, right? Because you don't need to be logged in to actually watch YouTube. You don't need to be logged in to Google search. So in fact, you can use all the Google services, just be logged out and not have any of that information tied to your actual identity, as long as you replace Gmail for ProtonMail.
That's true.
So I think that's actually I think that's the power of identity. And this is why it's so important to really control your identity in the digital era.
You talked quickly about VPN, ProtonVPN. So VPN is often touted like this magic thing, like you install it, you connect to a VPN, and then you're completely safe and nobody can grab anything about you. No one knows anything. So we obviously know that this isn't the case. It's not a silver bullet, but it is interesting. So could you just quickly describe, for you at least, the benefits of a VPN? And is it something that you absolutely need to use to regain privacy online?
I always go back to any security product. It's about threat model, right? And what that means is you need to understand what you want to be protected against, and if this product actually suits that need or not. VPN, there's actually a very wide range of use cases, but it's not a cure-all. It's not that you have a VPN and everything is good online, everything is safe, right? If we look at Proton users of our VPN service, there is a couple possibilities, right? There's one cohort which is trying to get access to data that they cannot access in their country. So this might be, a user in Russia trying to get access to Wikipedia to find out the, not government controlled source information to understand the truth. And this for Proton represents probably tens of millions of users, not just in Russia, but also in Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, countries like that. So from that perspective, I think there's a very, very, important use case. There's also a privacy use case, right? Today, if you don't use a VPN, you're essentially trusting your internet service provider to safely guard your browsing history. And I can tell you, if you read the terms and conditions, they're not doing that, right? Actually, they're collecting every single of your activity, packaging that, selling that, and monetizing that data. So using a VPN is one way to make sure that your browsing activity is private, it's actually kept safe. And then I think, of course, there's also some real security use cases as well, right? If you're in a public Wi-Fi in at a sketchy hotel somewhere in a not so free country, you may want to be on that VPN before you connect to sensitive information, sensitive accounts. So these are some of the use cases. But no, VPN is not going to prevent you from getting viruses. VPN is not going to make you completely anonymous. I hope with that, but it's not bulletproof as some people claim.
Yeah, it's part of your arsenal of tools that you can use, and depending on your current environment, where you are, what kind of network you're connected to, it's important to use it, or it's less important to use it. Another question I have is, you started with Proton Mail, and now you have built this up with Proton Drive, with Proton Pass, ProtonVPN. So you have a sort of suite, an ecosystem of services. Why are you focusing on building this sort of ecosystem if mail is basically like the cornerstone, the main thing you need to focus on?
Yeah, there's really a couple of reasons for that, right? I think the VPN, why do we get in the VPN business? Actually, we got in the VPN business because in 2017, we anticipated that probably Proton Mail would start to get banned in certain countries. And it did happen, right? It happened in Russia, it happened in Iran, it's happening, in numerous countries around the world where leadership doesn't want people to have freedom of expression, freedom of speech. And if you look at the VPN markets, back in 2017 and looked at the free VPN options, well, they were all scams essentially. Yeah. They were all selling your data. They were selling privacy and then actually selling your data to advertisers because that was how they were making money. So we built the VPN service because it actually was something that was necessary. It was something that we actually needed to provide because there were no good options on the market. And Drive, well, Proton Drive, the story for that goes back to 2014. It is something that we promised to deliver to the users in our Indiegogo campaign, almost 10 years ago. So that was just keeping a promise. And, we take that very seriously because those users that funded us, in 2014, the reason this project exists today is because of, their faith and their belief, right? And I think because of that, we do owe them to make good on the promises that we have made, even though it's been many, many years and there's no legal obligation to do so. I think we have a moral obligation to do so. Yeah, of course. And in Pass, well, the Pass, the newest product, is quite interesting. Pass, the product itself wasn't developed completely, let's say, by the original Proton engineers. What happened was in 2022, Proton actually merged with a company called a Simple Login, which is doing email aliases. Yeah. And that's actually a free service that every Proton user can actually benefit from. And what we realized when we looked at email aliases is, when you think about a data breach, are you really so concerned that your password got leaked? Actually, your password that got leaked, assuming they did it properly, well, probably it was hashed, right? Yeah. But even if it wasn't hashed, if you follow good password practices, the password was probably unique, so you're not so concerned. And after the leak, it is not so difficult to go out and change that password. But the other information that comes out in that leak, your email, well, that kind of sucks, right? You cannot change it very easily. You're going to get phishing, spam, all sorts of impersonation that can come out of that. That's a really dangerous piece of information that once out there is out there forever, and you cannot change it. So the idea of email aliases was really that in a data breach, when I sign up, because I'm afraid of data being hacked, when I sign up for a new service, I don't need just a unique, strong password for that service. It would also be good if I could have a unique email alias for that service. So in the event of a data breach, which is a matter of a when, not if, the information that is leaked about me is actually quite controlled.
Yeah, so that's why you need a password manager, because you need a way to store all these unique email aliases, because you can remember a bunch of passwords, maybe derivated from the same kind of base, but remembering 20, 30, 100 email addresses, you're never going to be able to retain those combinations. Yeah.
And every single email alias is actually associated with a login, with a unique password. So the password manager was actually a prerequisite in order to achieve the vision of protecting identity online through email aliases. So it wasn't such a crazy idea that we did it, right? Once you think about kind of why it makes sense for the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Since we're on the topic of like building an ecosystem, we have a question that came really often from the community, which is, are you planning to add something like Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Slides to Proton Drive, or do you plan to only remain on the storage side of things?
Yeah. Well, Proton as a company exists because of the community. We don't have any venture capital investors, so all of our financing comes from the community. And what that actually means is whoever the community wants, they're going to get, right? Because we literally work for them. We have no choice, actually. And if enough people ask for it, we are indeed going to do it. And what I can tell you about, documents, sheets, and things of this nature, it is a very common request. We hear it a lot. So I think the odds are good that we will eventually have to do it because given that we're community driven, we have no choice, right? It's kind of insane, right? Like if you tell Google I want this, Google doesn't care, right? But
they're only going to work on what makes them the most money. Even.
Yes. But if you tell us, hey, Proton, please build this, and many users want it, actually we are obliged to do it.
Yeah, because you don't want to lose those users because they're your only source of revenue.
Yeah. Because they pay our bills, right? Whereas, the Google user, the Google user actually is it's not the customer, right? The Google user is the product that is being sold to the real customer, which is the advertiser.
Most of them will not pay a cent to Google directly, like from their own pocket. So they don't have to listen to you, of course. Yeah. So now, what would you say differentiates you from various competitors? So we know what differentiates you from big tech companies, because obviously their client is not the user, their client is the person buying access to the data to advertise. But compared to smaller companies, there are a lot of other companies that focus also on privacy, on encryption. What differentiates Proton from those smaller competitors?
Yeah, and I think there are quite a few smaller ones in the space now. I think that's actually a good thing. And the funny thing also is, we open source a lot of our encryption code, right? We actually maintain OpenPGP.js, which is the most widely used open source, encryption, library. And if you look at the competition, a lot of them actually use our own code. So, in some sense, we're subsidizing them, right? And actually, I'm okay with that because I think, there's enough space for many players, and the more people who are doing kind of, what we have pioneered, the better it is for getting the message out, right? I think Proton is different, though, from the other companies in the space, the smaller ones, for probably two main reasons. First one is the experience, right? Being the first one in the space, having now almost 10 years of history, and having a track record of security and privacy for 10 years. There's something to that. As you get bigger and bigger, as you scale the product, the platform, and the infrastructure, there's so many challenges you can hit, right? Whether it's a DDoS attack, whether it's infrastructure overload, whether it's how do you handle spam and anti-abuse, how do you handle account takeovers? We have confronted, survived, and overcome most of those problems. So this allows us, I think, to probably provide more reliability, more stability, and more safety for most users, just because we've seen and confronted those problems. The second major difference, I think, is most of the other players that have entered this space, actually, they're VC-backed, they're investor-backed. And Proton is maybe one of the only ones in the space today that even up to now, is not beholden to venture capital investors. And this allows us the freedom to always do what is best for the user, as opposed to what the investors may require or demand. And there's just a lot of shortcuts you're forced to take, right? And things you cannot invest in. And to be frank, security is expensive. To do it right is very expensive, and it's a bit like buying insurance, right? Until something goes wrong, you could have just ignored it and not made the investments at all. And I think what makes Proton different is we don't have investors where we have to go and say, we have this profit margin, and we've hit these metrics to raise the next round of financing. So we're able to actually put a substantial amount of money towards projects, features which enhance security, but maybe don't enhance marketing. I think a good example is the encryption key transparency project we did recently, right? Which is a way to actually verify the encryption key that you're using is actually the right one. Can't market it because it's too hard to explain to people, and costs a lot of money to do. But it's a feature that probably only Proton will have because we're the only company that is not VC, backed and can actually, afford to spend on things like this without getting in trouble with investors.
Yeah.
And I think that's it's a subtle difference, but over time it does add up, I think, to a more secure, reliable product.
Absolutely, yeah. Having worked for the two kinds of companies, I absolutely preferred working for a company that was already sustainable. Yeah, it's just you have so much more freedom. So now you're talking about Proton offering an alternative to Google, basically, to let users step out from Google's, like, let's call it shadow, but a data collecting shadow, let's say. But is Proton a viable alternative to Google? Why would you say that Proton can replace today Google services?
Well, I think it depends on what service, right? Google has probably hundreds of services, and we're not there entirely. And depending on how you use certain products, even on the ones where we are there, we may not also be a complete replacement either, right? Because Google has hundreds of features that we don't have all of them, right? Although on the other hand, we also have some features that they don't have either, right? So I think it kind of goes both ways. But what I think we are trying to do more and more is to get the products to a state where actually the experience is pretty comparable. And if you were to use the mail product today and compare it to Gmail, I would say for more than 90% of the use cases, it can actually meet your needs. And other products are also getting up there as well. So Google wasn't built in a day, right? It was built over a course of 2 decades. And Gmail, I think, has been around since 2003 or 2004. It's been almost 20 years, right? And we're not going to get there immediately. Yeah. But I think also we are also building now in a space technology that's better, right? So what took Google maybe 10 years and 1,000 people to do, maybe can be done today in 2 or 3 years with 100 people, right? So from that perspective, the gap is continually closing, and I do think if you were to try the products today, a lot of people are quite surprised. Actually, this is a kind of funny anecdote, right? I think a few months ago, we asked a journalist, from Washington Post, to try out Proton and try switching, right? And then she was like, "Oh, it's too much trouble, a lot of work. I don't want to do it." And then she actually used our Easy Switch tool, and that's a tool that lets you switch from Gmail to Proton, and it was just a couple clicks. In fact, you could switch and pull all your emails over and get completely onboarded in Proton now from Gmail within probably 2 or 3 clicks. And it was so easy, in fact, that she was so surprised she wrote an article about it. So I think I think that's an example of kind of how with the advancement in technology, with GDPR forcing Google to support data portability, we're able to get to an experience where actually even people who are not tech savvy, have no technical background, don't know anything about encryption or software, like grandmas can use it now, right?
Yeah, the barrier to entry is much lower. Yeah, you don't have to migrate like data files or email files that you might have exported to a various format that is now completely incompatible with something else. It's way easier. But that goes back to another question that got asked quite a lot on the question the community posted, which is, basically, there seems to be an impression that Proton expands into a lot of different categories, but never completely reaches a state where it is a viable alternative. You said that now you're trying to bring every product to that state where you have like 90-95% of the features that most people will use. Can you tell me a little bit more about this? Like, do you agree with this statement? Like, you're expanding fast, but you don't necessarily have feature parity between platforms. And...
So I completely agree with the statement, and I can also say that actually it's intentional, right? And what is the reason behind that? Because it doesn't make a lot of sense from the outside, right? The reason is because perfecting products takes a long time. It's very difficult to do, and it takes a lot of iterations and cycles. And if I were to take each product to perfection before launching the next one, actually, I would probably never launch the next product, right? It would just never happen. And we know that doesn't work because Google, Microsoft, these tech giants, their ecosystem plays. So ecosystems is something that, if users don't expect today, they will expect in the future. So you have no choice but to build the ecosystem. And that's why you have to start things, at this, in parallel. because you know it takes a long time to get to that completion stage. And that's unfortunately the reality. Now, I wish I could deliver a perfect product before the next product, but if I know if I do that, the next product would never come.
Yeah.
And this is the situation. I would also say that launching products early, even when they're maybe not perfect, there's also an advantage to this because it allows us to get feedback much faster.
Yeah.
So we can then be much more responsive to user needs, and then we can adapt and really follow the path our community wants us to follow. And that is something that I believe in the long run does lead to better products, even if it's maybe more frustrating for the early adopters.
Yeah, it's basically the variant of what a startup would do, which is like release often, like the famous mantra, like move fast, break things. It's kind of this version, but without all the venture capital funding, which means that you have to take more time to build those. But you do expand and you do progress. You just cannot progress at the speed of someone who has like billions to throw out every year because they don't care about being like profitable yet.
Yeah, and I would say the typical startup, they will probably go 100% full speed, and and they don't care, right?
Yeah.
And even a lot of the startups in the security and privacy space, they act that way because they have no choice. Because to get the next financing to be around next year, they need to demonstrate a certain level of growth, and that requires chasing features and only features, right? But Proton, philosophically, that's not how we think. We can't think that way because actually we're in the security and privacy space. There are certain mistakes that we're not allowed to make.
Yeah.
And that's why, we will always do things in a certain way, not the fastest way, but in the way that we think is the most secure, right? And that often people say, oh, Proton, you're so slow. And well, yes, we are slow, but we're slow because we must be careful.
Yeah.
And we can afford to be careful because we don't have the VCs driving us to, ship X, Y, and Z and hit X revenue by a certain period of time, right? And that allows us to have a much higher bar on security and privacy than others, but it does come at a cost of speed. You can't get security for free, right? There's always a price you have to pay.
And so, since we're talking, like as you said, you're in the security and privacy business. Do you think that these are areas that the general public minds? Do you think they care about it right now, or is it something that is growing? Or
well, when I first started in 2014 and I went off and talked to just friends, family, people out on the streets, probably 1 in 10 person could actually explain to me how Google and Facebook make money. Today is not 10 out of 10, but it's probably 4 or 5 out of 10. And it's increasing a lot, year over year. And I think Proton being able to get to where we have 100 million accounts really shows that, the concern is going mainstream. And the easy way to think about this is if I were to ask you or anybody else in the world, do you want more privacy and security? No one's ever said no to that, right? The answer is always yes. But the question is, at what cost? What do I give up? What is it going to cost me? And I think our mission as a company and what technology will enable us to do is to make that cost really essentially zero over time. And when you achieve that, I don't see why there'd be any reason why people wouldn't want to switch.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have access to the same features, if it's as easy to use, if it's compatible with the same devices, and why would you pick some? Well, and if it's free, why would you pick something that collects data compared to something that doesn't? Of course. And with that in mind, now we've talked about the ecosystem, we've talked about your various products, how you approach them. What's next? Let's say for the next 2 years, can you share a little bit more about what you're trying to build, what you want to focus on? Do you already have enough requests that you want to fulfill for the community?
Yeah, well, I think if you go look at the our Reddits and what people are asking for, right? Essentially, what they're asking for is going to get built more or less. If you go back to our Indiegogo campaign and what we said we're going to do, all those things we're actually going to do, right? So I would say we are probably in the next immediate period going to be focused actually on consolidating existing products and making them bigger. Because if you think about it, it wasn't so long ago that we launched Pass and Drive. And so we will be, I think, quite focused on improving those products in the next 6 to 9 months. But near the end of next year, we will for sure be, looking at the different comments in the community and making sure that we meet the ones that are, most demanded.
Okay, and since like this is for my channel, the Linux Experiment, so we're going to talk a little bit about Linux support.
Oh yeah.
I know you rebuilt the VPN client for Linux very recently.
Yes.
I think it was rebuilt from scratch, and so I've been using it because obviously I'm a consumer for Proton, so I have like I think it's the first tier. But yeah, it's nice to have that cool experience. But the main thing is, do you plan to have those same apps available for Linux for Proton Drive or Proton Pass? Do you have native clients planned for Linux for these two tools as well?
The answer is yes, right? We probably a third of the company uses Linux. I'm a Linux user myself, so it is inevitable that we support Linux.
Yeah.
But the reality is Linux is not going to be the biggest market.
No,
it's not always going to, when you ask people what they want, what platform they want us to support, it's never going to be at the top of the list. So if you look at Drive, the first desktop client that went out was actually Windows. Why? Because it was just had the most votes, right? And then Mac OS came out a few weeks ago because it was the obvious second one. And Linux is something that we will have to do. It's inevitable. Linux is in many ways actually the hardest platform to build for, because there are so many variants, so many distributions, so many little, differences between different distros are causing to break. It's extremely difficult to support. So it's always going to take longer. And what I can say is we're, of course, committed to Linux. Linux users ourselves, we must be committed to Linux. Our entire infrastructure runs on Linux, right? Yeah. So that is coming sooner or later. And, I wish I could do it sooner, but with the resources at hand, it's always going to take longer than the other platforms. And
I get what you're saying, because obviously, yes, you have plenty of different distros, but nowadays we have 3 different packaging formats that support virtually all distributions, which are Flatpak, Snaps, and App Images. So any one of these could theoretically serve everyone. Like, of course, if you do Snaps, then non-Ubuntu distros. But if you do Flatpak, you're going to work on everyone. Do you know if there are like technical limitations that prevent you from using Flatpak? Like maybe the sandbox prevents you from interacting with things?
Yeah, so it depends a lot on the product as well. And let me give you, a couple of examples, right? If I want to make a mail application on Linux, that's actually pretty easy. Yeah. And that's probably going to be coming sooner than you might imagine, right? If I want to do it on a password manager, that's also relatively easy. And in fact, you can use Proton Pass, on browsers already, because there's a browser extension, right? But if I go to something like VPN, for example, VPN has an interface with a network stack. And some Linux distributions have network manager. Some have IP tables, all this stuff, right? It's
NetPlan, whatever.
Even the kernels are different, right? And you need kernel modules in order to interface the network stack, right? That's super complicated. Then you talk about Drive. Well, even the file systems of different distributions are different, right? Not everybody uses the same file system, and the way in which you interface, with the kernel is different. The desktop experience is different as well, right? The way you browse files is different as well. So depending on the level in which the product sits, whether it's very much can be abstracted away from the kernel, or whether it's sitting directly at the kernel level, the difficulty in supporting multiple distributions varies quite a bit. So VPN was a very difficult one. That's why it took so many years to be able to put something out there. And unfortunately, Drive looks to be even harder.
Okay. Well, I guess that will answer. I think that was the biggest question we got, which was like, okay, when are the Linux apps coming? So you want to do them. You don't. Do you have a time frame that you could potentially share for Drive on Linux, or do you not want to put something out there?
I'm going to get in trouble for this interview now. But what I can say is, having analyzed the problem, quite a bit in the last 6 months, kind of going back to what I said, it's in fact harder than VPN. It's in fact going to be the hardest one to bring to Linux, because the file systems, act so differently, right? And the time frame, in fact, depends on the level of integration that we want to achieve. Because there are easier and harder integrations in terms of how automated it is, how it interfaces with the GUI, etc. Right? So I can very easily see an Ubuntu version, probably being able to arrive, let's say, in the next 12 to 24 months, right? But to get to a state where I can comfortably say, hey, I've covered, all the main distributions and Linux is, 90% supported, that could take substantially longer.
And it also depends on the number of features you want to bring. If it's a basic sync client, which just uploads, downloads, might be easier to do than something that lets you decrypt on the fly or access or mount your storage as an additional web dev storage or.
If I want to support SMB or LDAP or something like that, then it gets very complicated, right? But if it's a folder on the desktop or in the home directory that syncs with the cloud, that's much easier to integrate, right? And so it depends on the feature set. I do want to get something out there for Linux, users, in the next year or two. This is something that I think we should do. But it's quite difficult, and if VPN wasn't so easy either, but a drive looks to be a challenge. But it is definitely planned.
Well, I guess this will answer a lot of people then. And since we're still talking about features, let's talk about ProtonVPN. Some people asked me if ask you, but through me, if ProtonVPN will offer dedicated IP addresses for non-business users. And in that case, can you ensure the privacy of those users?
Wow. Okay, so this is, I guess your community knows Proton very well because, they know that we don't offer for consumers. They know it's available for businesses. So, it's a very specific question. But the answer is yes. I do want to offer dedicated IPs for, consumers who don't need to get the business plan. So that is for sure coming. And I probably shouldn't say this because I'm going to end up undermining my own product, right? But now the question becomes, if I'm a VPN user, should I get the dedicated IP, right? And I'll be completely honest, because I'm a scientist, I can't help it, right? If you offer privacy, don't get a dedicated IP. You'll pay us less actually to not have that feature, but it's not more private because it's an IP address in which all your activity is linked to you because you have bought that IP. Right. So there is no privacy angle. Despite what the checkout on other VPN services are trying to tell you, there's no additional privacy in getting dedicated IP.
It's more a matter of control than of privacy.
Yes. Now the benefit you might have is maybe you'll hit less captchas, right? So maybe you'll be able to go to various sites and encounter less problems because you're not on a shared IP. So it's not to say that it's not beneficial. But objectively speaking, I cannot honestly tell you that dedicated IP won't improve your privacy, right? Despite what some of the other ads out there say, it's not true.
It's not, And speaking of Proton in general, there's a question about the environmental impact of Proton, like Proton Drive, because obviously when you're starting to store a lot of data, you have to have a lot of computers, of storage, or maybe a data center somewhere. So do you know generally what the environmental impact of the company is right now?
Yes, so we only buy servers from data center providers that are actually essentially carbon neutral, so 100% renewable. So we have today a facility in Switzerland that meets that criteria. Our German facility is also there, and the next facility that we're building is actually in Norway. And we're going to Norway because the power costs are significantly lower, and it's also outside the EU. And that facility will also be, running on green power as well. So we do what we can to, minimize the impact. And actually, we're financially incentivized to do so because power is one of the main costs, especially here in Europe, where it's quite expensive, right? And I think, going to Germany, the power isn't cheapest in Germany, but it is pretty clean. So, we are paying more to ensure the green energy mix is, good in our products. And it's something, of course, that we care a lot about as well within the company.
Yeah, well, I guess when you're trying to be ethical in terms of data, of privacy, you have to care about those aspects as well. Yes. They sort of go hand in hand, even though they might not look like they are linked. They sort of are if you're trying to run a moral company.
Yes. And now, honestly, it's software, right? It's writing the software as efficiently as possible to just consume less CPU because that's the main driver of electrical power.
And another feature that is requested is implementing notifications on Androids that aren't using the Google Play services, I guess to maybe also allow the app to be published on F-Droid and other alternative stores that are like purely for open source apps. Do you have any plans to work on that?
Yeah, it's So the reason we're, let's say, okay to some extent, using Google Play services is because we actually end-to-end encrypt the push notifications. So even though notifications are going through, Google Play services, Google doesn't actually get any of the metadata in that notification because it's end-to-end encrypted. So that's why, from a privacy standpoint, it isn't exactly a massive burning fire, right? Now, what is the issue with alternative notification systems? Well, Google, whether it's for anti-competitive reasons or because of the way they set the platform, makes it so that the power efficiency of Google Play services is very good. But if you were to use a separate system to do it, actually battery life is going to suffer on Android devices. And this is kind of the trade-off, right? Where if I ask the vast majority of Proton customers, would you rather have ditch Google Play services and have worse battery life, or would you rather have Google Play services better battery life? Considering the fact that notifications are end-to-end encrypted, probably the most users would say, I prefer the battery life, right? Now, there are going to be some users who would take a different stance on that. And actually, I'm one of those users as well. So we do, in the long run, want to make the switch. And it is something that is inevitably going to happen. But we're going to have to leave both options, always.
Could it be an option inside the app? Is it manageable to do it this way? Like letting the user choose which backend they would prefer using, like as an advanced option?
I think the way to do it is the F-Droid version will do it one way. And the Google Play version would do it a different way. And you saw the one that you want, right? But the cost of that is now you're forced to maintain two versions of the application. We already have complaints about platform parity, about not developing fast enough, not getting complete on all features. So it's just about prioritizing all the different requests that come in. So it's on the list. It hasn't gotten to the top of the list, but it will eventually.
There's also a question about the source code. Some people seem to think that the source code of your Android apps is pretty hard to find because there seem to be a bunch of different GitHub accounts. Like they're not regrouped under a single umbrella.
I have a very simple answer for this, but it's going to sound super stupid, right? The person that owns github.com/proton, he doesn't want to give it up, right? And he got there first, so it's his, right? So if someday we get it, then we're going to consolidate, right? But that's the reason, really, right? And we could do Proton something different, right?
You could put everything under ProtonMail and then have a mail repo and then drive repo.
So probably eventually we'll do it. But last time we tried, we couldn't get the username that we wanted.
Okay. Well, yep, that happens.
Well, it happened to our domain, right? Ideally we could get proton.com, but we can't, right? It's a car company in Malaysia, so we have proton.me, which I think is also nice. It's also very memorable.
And I think that was a question as well for the email addresses. One of the questions was saying why proton.me, because for a business it might not sound super professional, and they would prefer have something like proton.com or
well. You can still use protonmail.com, right? That's still an option, so you can pick which one you want. But I think there's a certain logic to the .me. First of all, because what is Proton really about at the end of the day? It's about putting you in control of your data. Right. So it's about you as a person, and I think the .me does reflect that in a way, and it's pretty memorable. You don't confuse it with something else, right? If we use .ch, they might say, oh, that's China, right? Or or it doesn't sound quite right. And it's a bit like a Zoom. Zoom is a collaboration service, right? So Zoom uses zoom.us, right? .us. So I think the fixation on .com is probably not the way that it used to be in the past. And I think you see more and more companies using other domains. And I like the fact that it ties in really with the mission of Proton being about you. And if you say it out loud, Proton me, it's like, Proton me, right?
It makes sense.
So, there's a logic to it. And this is also why, many years ago, we also acquired a short domain called pm.me, right? And that was really like, literally private message me, right?
It forces that privacy thing.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the reason why we settled on that one. But yeah, if we could have the .com, I think we would have taken that, of course, right?
Yeah. In terms of other features, there's another question about feature parity, like for the mobile apps. This person specifically was talking about calendar search and mail filters. So I guess it circles back to those questions about feature parity. Like this is what you're trying to focus on right now, like not necessarily launching 20 other different products, but trying to bring all the products to the same baseline.
Yeah.
So I think we answered this one. Unless you have a timeline specifically for these two features.
Well, I think that's interesting. So we have a philosophy, and our philosophy at Proton is when it's ready on one platform, we're going to launch it.
Yeah.
Because the alternative is waiting for all the platforms to be ready. But then a benefit that an Android user could have obtained would have been artificially held back for maybe a week or two waiting for iOS to catch up, or even longer, right? So the launch and ready philosophy is to bring value to users as quickly as possible. Now, this user asked about search, and search is extremely difficult. Why? Because all of our data is encrypted.
Yeah.
So I cannot run the search queries on the server. It has to be run client side. So every single thing that has to do with search is super complicated because we have to build software that can index the data and search it locally as opposed to using a server-side library, which means it has to be built basically once on every single platform.
Yeah.
And that unfortunately makes it harder. So it is coming. We are going to get it on all platforms, but that's the reason why it's not flip the switch and then we have search.
Another feature some people were inquiring about is SMTP relay. Some people seem to think that this should be available more widely to more people.
Yeah, I would love to do it actually to make it available more widely, but it's an anti-abuse issue because imagine a relay that wasn't properly controlled and monitored. If an abuser got a hold of that, and they could just send tons of emails through Proton, it'd be a fast way to get our IPs blocked.
Yeah.
So the reason it's pretty let's say more limited today is because it allows us to reduce the risk of the relay being abused in a way that would hurt Proton's reputation for our IPs. As we scale, expand, and improve anti-abuse capabilities, we will also be able to make it available to more people. But it's never going to be probably a free feature, just because one of the best ways to cut down on abuse is to make sure that they have a valid credit card and they're actually a legit user.
Yeah, the person asking specifically was asking about at least Proton Unlimited customers. But yeah, of course, you can't give that for free because that's like a recipe for a disaster.
Yeah. And I would say to answer the limited question, it's probably a matter of time.
Yeah, okay. Now, there are also some concerns that, of course, you started with like the privacy user, the individual. Now you're expanding to business and enterprise. And so some people are wondering, is that going to affect the feature set that individuals can expect? Are the resources going to be shifted towards more enterprise and businesses? Or how will you maintain that balance between the two?
Yeah. Well, as of today, and I can't speak for the future, but let's talk about today for now, right? The request that businesses are asking for and the requests that consumer users are asking for, actually, if you look at those lists of requests, they're basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. So everything that we add for business is actually something that the regular user is also looking for.
Okay.
So we don't really have a situation where we have to make that trade-off yet. Now, to be completely honest, I do anticipate eventually, reaching a stage where we have to make a decision, build the feature for the consumer or build a feature for the business. But it hasn't happened yet today, and we're probably still, I think, some ways off before we have to get to that stage.
Yeah.
Proton at its heart, because of our crowdfunding beginnings and how we got to where we are today, the soul of the company is probably always consumer.
Yeah.
And that's very hard to change. But there is also very strong enterprise demand for our products, and that's something that we want to do more and more. And I think it's actually not a bad thing for the consumer users as well, because if we have more enterprises paying for the services, that actually means we can give more things away for free to the consumers.
Yeah.
So in the end, I think it's a mutually beneficial type of synergy that we are in both markets.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can sort of subsidize, that's not the right word, but subsidize the free accounts with more enterprise accounts that will obviously have a little bit more money to pay for these features.
Yes.
And now there's one thing that, since we're talking about ecosystems, we always hear this thing that don't put your eggs all in one basket.
Yeah.
Like you have to diversify to use multiple services for individual things. So why should we use the complete Proton ecosystem if the right thing to do would be to use individual services?
Yeah. Well, the situation right now is you have many baskets, and most of the baskets are poor quality baskets that are very likely to get hacked or leaked or broken or just fail outright. So one school of thought could be maybe it's better to have one really strong basket as opposed to a dozen not so strong baskets that that may get hacked, may get breached, may go out of business, etc. Right? So I think that is maybe one counter argument to that. At least when it comes to Proton, what people seem to object to, and I completely understand the point they're making, is I don't want to have one account for everything.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a solution to that. We don't prohibit you from having more than one Proton account. So there are some folks who, have one account for Proton Pass, one for Proton Mail, and then one for ProtonVPN. And that's perfectly acceptable. You can do that, right? So I do think that is a solution. But, it's already so hard to protect accounts in general. So I would rather have one account that I put, 2FA on, have Proton Sentinel to, safeguard against breaches, and just keep one account safe as opposed to secure, a dozen accounts.
Yeah, of course. And speaking of this, the two-factor authentication, do you have any plans to support like passwordless login methods? We're seeing passkey, stuff like that happening.
Passkey, right? Yeah. Passkey from a technology standpoint is actually probably sound, right? The difficulty is nobody has still managed to find an implementation that is actually, what I would consider to be sufficiently user-friendly. So I do think it's a step in the right direction, but I'm not quite sure yet if it's actually going to be able to, really change and get mass adoption.
Yeah.
And it is something that, for example, next year we're going to bring passkeys to Proton Pass, right?
Okay.
And we're going to be actively involved in the space, and we're going to do what we can to support it. But it's still very uncertain whether or not that's going to be something that everybody can adopt. And this is why, I think a few months ago, we launched something called Proton Sentinel, right? And Proton Sentinel is a system that basically uses AI and also machine learning algorithms combined with human analysts to try to spot malicious logins within our system. Because the thinking is your credentials are going to get stolen.
Yeah.
It is almost inevitable. So what Sentinel is actually trying to do is try to give safeguards and protection so that even if your credential is stolen, even if the attacker has your password, we can still detect that and still block that. So I think that type of defense is probably maybe a better return on investment than something like passkeys at this moment in time, just because that's something I can roll out to anybody without any user interaction, whereas passkeys require users to really change behavior and adopt new tools.
Now there's someone asking about end-to-end encryption. They said that it only works with emails between Proton Mail accounts. So saying if a lot of your contacts don't use Proton Mail, then is email encryption all that important? Because obviously, like, you could request the emails from the person you send them to, and then you have them unencrypted.
Yeah, I think it depends on your threat model, right? If someone sends an email from Gmail to you, actually that email is stored encrypted, in your inbox. So it gives you security in case your account, gets breached. It gives you, security in that, we cannot abuse your privacy to monetize that data. So there's still a lot of value there, right? Of course, the police could potentially, go to that person and ask them for that information. But I would say that's probably not most people's threat model, right? And a very good way to fix that is to just encourage everybody to come on Proton, right? Because then the network effect kicks in. But even if you don't care about email as communication, I think email as an entity is huge. So how often do you actually use email as a communication tool? I would say these days is probably quite rare. So the fact that you are using Proton Mail and your identity is now separated from Google's whole surveillance system, that I think is super valuable, even if you don't care about any of the encryption at all.
The next question will be about VPN, Proton VPN. A lot of VPN providers are restricting port forwarding because it's being very, very much misused. Do you think you will have to at some point also disable it? And if you can explain just in simple terms why this might be a problem for people who might not understand this thing.
Yeah, so port forwarding is essentially, you sort of expose the port so that devices and other people outside the network can see your port, right? The use case where this is sometimes useful, and I'm not condoning, let's say piracy, right? But a lot of people who use BitTorrent, if you can use port forwarding, you can get much faster speeds, right? Of course, you're not allowed to use Proton for illegal purposes, so don't do that. But port forwarding is a feature that we currently, do support. And a lot of VPNs have canceled it because they simply cannot handle the abuse parts that come with that. We are in a fortunate position because email is a space that has tons of abuse. So for better or for worse, we have been forced to become very good at anti-abuse. And the same technologies that we have used, the same skills and techniques, we have also been able to use to try to reduce abuse on ProtonVPN. So as of today, we're able to control the level of abuse on port forwarding, where we can still keep the feature available. And I'm pretty optimistic that we'll be able to maintain this even when other people cannot, simply because we have the different expertise that I think other VPN companies don't have.
Yeah, that's really nice. I think the person who, or the multiple persons who asked this question will be very happy about this. The next one is generally about email in general. Email was never built to be a private tool of communication. Like the protocol themselves that it relies upon are not private, and they were never meant to be. Is this really still a truth? And like, is end-to-end encryption and zero-access encryption sufficient to fix, let's say, this design?
Yeah, email is not designed, with encryption in mind.
Yeah.
It's encryption is something that we have to retrofit on top of email, and that's been the case even from TLS many years ago. But what is that? What is the practical implication of that, right? Why is email so hard to update and bring to the modern age? It's so hard to bring to the modern age because it's a federated system. Yeah. So all servers need to talk the same language and understand each other. So that might seem like a major weakness, but it's also, in my opinion, a major strength, because email is, if you think about it truly, maybe the most successful communication technique ever devised by mankind in the history of civilization. There is nothing that is more ubiquitous and more easy to use and more accessible than email. Anybody can run a server. Anybody can get an account. It's completely free. You don't need to be beholden to any single company to use it. It's a completely federated system. And I think that value of email truly outweighs some of the downsides of the fact that it's federated and then you cannot update it. Yeah. So what we do at Proton is we're trying to do what we can to make it as secure as possible. Yeah. And we've actually gotten quite far with a lot of the work that we've done, right? It is today, legitimately quite secure if you use it in an end-to-end encrypted way. Will it ever be as something as secure as what you could achieve if you tore it all down and rebuilt it? Probably not. But if you did that, you would also lose the ability of email to be a universal identifier and your universal passport online. Yeah. And that is, I think, the main power.
But yeah, basically it's saying, yes, we know email is not like the most private thing. It was never designed to be, but people will still use it for private communications and for stuff that they want to stay private. So you might as well try and make that protocol safer instead of trying to reinvent something that will never have the same level of adoption.
Yes, exactly.
Now, the next question is, what do you think about the following claim? Proton is open source, but is working on their own solutions instead of working on more open standards. So basically, the question, I think, boils down to what protects your users and the open source community in general from a license change or from a change in business model?
Yeah. First of all, on email side, SMTP, IMAP, these are standards that have been around forever. We cannot deviate and change on this, right? It's email is email. So the question is probably more relevant towards OpenBGP and that standard, which if you look at OpenPGP today that we use, is completely different from OpenPGP of the early 90s. It's been modernized, it's been made more secure, it's been completely revamped and redeveloped to be modern crypto. And from that perspective, it has changed massively. And actually, Proton has been one of the main drivers of that change because we've pushed through these changes over the past 4 or 5 years. This is why if you use PGP, even 10 years ago, and look at what Proton is doing today, OpenPGP.js, it's in some ways unrecognizable, right? But what we have always done, and I think this is something that maybe makes Proton quite unique, is we don't do these changes unilaterally. We could actually, because we're probably today the largest OpenPGP deployment in the world, but all of our changes go through RFCs, they go through IETF, we go through the standard bodies. And it's a huge cost that we pay. It's terribly painful, very, very slow, super annoying. You want to kill yourself sometimes, right? But we have paid that cost because we're very committed to open standards. And this is, I think, maybe something that comes from the fact that, I'm not a businessman at the end of the day, right? I'm a particle physicist, I'm a scientist. I believe in standards and open source and open communications and transparency. And that's a cultural DNA of the company that I think is, not going to change as long as, we're here and the community endorses us to take this path.
Now, the next question is about the infrastructure. What safeguards do you have in place to ensure that users don't lose their data, let's say in a data center fire, or if, I don't know, a giant electromagnetic pulse wipes up everything?
Yeah. Well, if there's a giant, asteroid that hits, Europe and destroys all of Europe, I probably can't guarantee your data security in that case.
But
right?
we will all probably have bigger problems than that.
But if it's OVH being stupid and having bad cabling that burns down the data center, this I can secure against, right? So what we do, of course, is we replicate data in multiple sites, and this is why each of Proton's big data centers are in different countries. Some people really said, "Hey, Proton, everything should be in Switzerland," but we said, "No, we can't do that, right? Because that's a reliability risk." So the fact that it's Swiss, German, and Norwegian, different facilities, different vendors, different suppliers in all locations, this helps with that. There's also offline backups that we make of all data. So overall, a lot of safeguards have been put in place. And I think that's something that probably, we can do better than other companies because Proton actually doesn't go to the cloud, right? It's not an AWS, it's not a Google Cloud, it's not an Azure. We build our own infrastructure. And this allows us to provide more reliability and more security because it's actually our computer, it's our servers, it's our hardware, right? Somebody at Amazon cannot make a decision to delete all of our instances and then we're gone, right? It's not perfect. There's no such thing as 100% security, but I do think we do a very reasonable job. And the fact that we're not cloud-based, gives an additional layer of protection.
There's another question about quantum computing and whether you think this will change. Well, obviously, like quantum computing will give a lot more horsepower to specifically decrypt stuff. So will we need to invent something new at that point, or will the power of quantum computers allow us to build way better encryption that needs something even better than a quantum computer?
Well, we for sure have to invent something new. And the good news that I can share, because we've actually published it now is that we have invented something new already. So if you look at our blog, we recently announced an update to OpenPGP that is post-quantum. And so we've already done the work. There's actually already at IETF a working group that we are participating in that is working on standardizing post-quantum encryption in OpenPGP. So this is coming. This work has already largely been done, and we do know how to protect data in the quantum era, and there is already the work that has been done to prepare for that. Personally, I think it's still probably 5-10 years out before we get the first quantum computers. But when it happens, Proton is actually ready.
We have another question about ProtonMail Bridge. So this is the technology that allows you to integrate your ProtonMail account into other apps like Thunderbird or Outlook. Will this work at some point with Calendar and Contacts, and will it be offered for Android as well?
So this is a controversial topic. Always, even within Proton. My personal opinion And and again, my personal opinion is not the one that matters; it's the community opinion that matters, right? But personally, I don't like the path of Bridge. The reason I don't like the path of Bridge is because you're completely dependent on the actions of a third-party application provider, which could at any moment in time change the way they want to do things. I'll give you an example. There's a new version of Outlook that Microsoft has rolled out in beta, and on this version, actually Microsoft has decided that they want to drop support for IMAP and third-party integrations, right? So as hard as we try to make Bridge as good as possible, ultimately, whether or not this technology can continue to thrive is completely dependent on third parties that we have no control over, which actually in the future may not even be interested in continuing to support, IMAP as opposed to just directly having APIs, right? So the path forward, I believe, for Proton, and I hope the community will support us on this, is actually to build desktop applications and roll those out. So that's something that you can expect to see quite soon. And we hope that it can be a replacement for Bridge. We don't know that it will automatically or right away, but I do think it's kind of inevitable. If you look at the direction that Microsoft is going with Outlook, I do think that they're going to force everybody to their API, and Outlook that supports IMAP and third-party clients and third-party services. This is probably going away sooner or later, unfortunately.
Do you have any plans to have like a separate segment of Proton Drive, which would be a photo gallery? Like a lot of other storage options have that separated on the side, so you could auto sync your photos from your phone to your storage and have them in a separate space as well.
So Nick, when are you publishing this interview?
It's going to be on YouTube, and it's going to be on PeerTube and on my audio podcast, which is like self-hosted.
But it's the next week, right?
Yeah.
So,
it's going to be on the 15th probably of December.
Yeah. So by the time viewers see this, Proton photos in Drive will be available already on one platform.
Very nice.
I won't say which one, but you'll find out soon.
Okay, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So another question is, do you think you'll be able to work on a Proton Notes app, like a separate note storage that would also be encrypted and available for everyone?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because today there is already notes built within Proton Pass. So Proton Pass actually has encrypted notes. So the basic functionality is already there. Then the question becomes, does it make sense to do it as a separate application? And if we do, documents in Drive is a part of that in the future. And to be honest, I don't know the answer to that. So if you're a Proton user and this is something that's on your mind, come on Reddit, let us know what you think, and let us know what direction we should actually take. Do we enhance the notes functionality in Proton Pass? Do we build a separate application? Or do we just directly go to try to do documents in Drive? I don't know the answer. The community answer will be what we actually do.
Okay. And I think a final interesting one, and this will have to conclude for the interview, is about VPN. Apple recently announced that you could add VPN services on the Apple TV and on tvOS. I think they already announced one, but I'm not sure which one it is. I think it might be ExpressVPN. Do you have any plans to work on a Proton VPN app for Apple TV? So this would, I guess, only really solve the thing of trying to view content from a country where you're not supposed to watch it.
I think now that Apple has proper support for it, it's something that we will also add as well. It's there's demand for it, and we know that today a lot of people use Proton actually to get access to content. And because of our, let's say, strong experience in networking and and server infrastructure, actually Proton is very good at making different streaming and different content systems work, because it's a highly technical product, and we are of course engineers and scientists at heart. So when we apply our, let's say, mathematical skills to that problem, we do it a lot better than, let's say, the VPNs who spend most of their effort on marketing, right? So it is something that we do better than others today, and I think we will want to bring that to Apple TV for sure.
Yeah, that's very nice to hear, because I do own an Apple TV, and I would love to have access to like content that is only available in the US, because in France we have some kind of weird restriction where something has to be out in movie theaters for like a year and a half before we can have it. It's a whole thing, and it's super annoying for a lot of stuff. So I think this will conclude this. This is all the time we have, unfortunately. So there were a lot of questions that unfortunately we could not look at because there just were way too many. So thank you still for taking the time to answer all of this, Andy. It was really, really nice of you to take the time to do so. And I hope the audience will be satisfied with a lot of those answers. And obviously, if there are some comments and some things that maybe ask for follow-ups, maybe we'll do a follow-up for this video.
Yeah, and I think also, for the different users and viewers out there, if you didn't like the answer, I work for you, right? So come on Reddit, come on Twitter, let us know you didn't like the answer, and let us know what the answer should have been, and then we'll discuss it.
Sure.
And if your question didn't get answered, come on social media, find us, and we'll answer your question.
Yeah, I think that's the best way you can ask for anything. just get onto the place where you're supposed to and just ask for it. And if enough people ask for it, then it will be made.
Because we're not Google, right? We actually work for the user. So if you want it and you ask for it, we actually have to respond. So good.
And that's always the best way to do it. So thanks for coming in, and thank you all for watching the video, and I guess you will see me in the next one. And Andy, I'm gonna say goodbye.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So, thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you did, don't hesitate to drop a like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, or to write a comment. And if you didn't, let me know why in the comments as well. And if you like the channel and you like these sort of videos, these take a lot of time to make. If you want to support what I do, I left plenty of links in the description to help me keep making those videos. So, thanks for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!